So I was talking to a lot of people in the audience, and all of them had the same question. Andrew, what were you thinking of when you came up with this title?
I am not going nowhere near that, Chris. I thought you were going to ask, what was I thinking saying yes to you?
All right. So let's go with what a build to buy is and whether anyone here on stage has done one.
A build to buy often comes about when a strategic company wants a new product in a specific sector. They have a defined interest there, and they're not seeing any likely companies that are organically being developed. And they say, let's go make something. And this can be very efficient and effective in that they can fund it without spending venture dollars, which are very, very expensive due to the risk and uncertainty and illiquidity of venture investments, and get more of what they want. There can be a great collaboration between the startup and the strategic, which can make the whole process more efficient and better, frankly. And typically, it's structured such that at a certain milestone, the strategic would take it over and take it forward from there.
Yep. And look, talking about it from my former hat at Medtronic, the way we would think about build to buys would be what you said. You're building off of a proven internal interest in a product that you're not prepared to fund internally with your own dollars. You tend to pick someone that's got a proven capability to make a product, and you want to get it to market, and you've got to basically make the accounting work so that it doesn't roll up on your budget. It rolls up on the startup budget that you provide financing for. And that's the rub, right? Because then it's an option. It's not an obligation. You can negotiate puts, which does get done in the market, but it's an option, and it's medtech development, and development can take anywhere from 3 to 10 years. And I think the rub on build to buys is that a lot can happen in 3 to 7 years. The product can take longer to go to market. The market can change. Your estimate that you were going to be first or second to market could drop to being third or fourth to market, which changes the economic value of the project. And, like many things in medical device product development, there's no absolute rainbow of certainty at the back end of it. So, that's kind of the things that are in play as people negotiate whether to do these and what their incumbent risks are when you actually go ahead and put one in place.
Yeah, I think one point you alluded to, Chris, was the accounting issues for the strategics. And you could probably spend an hour just talking about the ins and outs and pains and how the guys with the green eye shades who run the strategics. Fundamentally, every dollar that's spent on R&D is a dollar less profit. And so how do you get those profits off the P&L, or those R&D costs off the P&L?
Yep.
And build to buys do that if you structure the company such that the accountants can decide that that company is truly independent.
We're not here to give anyone any accounting advice. But, it's a lot of structuring, and you should consult your accountant to get it off your books. But, the rules change. In general, the startup company has to be at risk to some degree. It can't be all the money coming from the strategic, and they've got to raise their own capital. And, you can't, if it walks and talks like a duck, it's a duck. And the same thing, if the strategic puts all the money in, then it's on their P&L almost no matter what you do. So there's got to be some ebb and flow of who's at risk for both equity and debt on things like that. But let's presume that you can get around the accounting and you put it in place, and it's an option, not a requirement to buy it. And now you got to go through development. And at the back end of it, you get to the altar of consummation, and a lot of stuff hopefully hasn't changed. And the strategic goes, just what I wanted. Thank you. Buy it. Pre-negotiated deal and close. That's what a build to buy looks like when it works. And I don't know, I could think of 3 or 4 that we did at Medtronic that went according to plan, where you pull the trigger on it and it's good, but it doesn't always work out that way.
Tell us about some of those, Chris, because we're dying to hear about deals that
I don't know, like OsteoCool, I think we did with Bayless. That was a straightforward, buy this, slide it in here, worked out just the way it did. I could think of some that were build to buys that didn't work out, where they didn't make the technical specs, they couldn't get the product cleared, and it was a clear cut. You got to write that down, and there's nothing to do. But you kind of look at it and say, everybody tried, couldn't build it, didn't get FDA approval, and you walk away from it. It's the stuff in the middle that I think becomes a little frustrating.
Yeah, I know you're both looking at me. But I want to go back just a bit.
Sure.
Because I think the real important point for me is I am super pro these arrangements, but they're fundamentally an alternative funding strategy for larger companies, right? That I would always say that every one of the strategics basically have the capacity to do anything, but they can't do everything. It's allowing us to work with them to find out what those underfunded opportunities or the opportunities that are under their funding line get up to the top. Right? And I think that where I was going to start to go on the analogy, you've got to both go into this marriage with the same level of commitment, which I think is there is your fundamental problem, right? Which is you have an inequity of power. The startup is all 100% focused on this particular opportunity. The strategic, the groom in this case, gets the choice of whether or not they want to actually go through with the arrangement. And that's a tension that you've got to be able to balance for, I think, throughout, with making sure that you've signed a good prenup, basically, that you've got to have a good exit clause.
That prenup is super important, starting with making sure that this is a product that's fundamentally of broader interest, so that it's not just really parochially of interest to one strategic, and that there are lots of other buyers who might be interested in this.
Yep.
So that's the fundamental of having alternatives.
Yeah, there's your power, right? That you can go to someone else, you can go to a potential competitor. And that when you get into these discussions, as we've had, Chris, that is where things can go awry, because all of a sudden that becomes competitive, and some people don't like that. It's something that we need to be able to get these things funded. If it's venture funded, we need that competition.
You can't build a product that only works at one strategic.
No,
you just can't.
Waste of time.
You got to build a medical device, and the device has to have broad market appeal. It has to satisfy all the things that a startup would have to satisfy from a market perspective, no matter what.
Yeah.
And as long as that's the case, if for whatever, look, things happen at a strategic, right? Here's a partial list of everything that can happen at a strategic over a 7-year development period on a build to buy. New CEO, new GM of the business unit. Everybody thought that you were going to be first to market and you're fourth to market because the product development time took longer than you thought it was going to take, blah, 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 blah. Just keep going down and down. You thought it was going to cost X, it costs Y, Y is 2 times X. And, the amount of money that you're going to make on it at a later, market launch point is half of what the NPV was when you approved the deal, 6 years ago.
Yep.
So all that stuff can happen, which is why it's an option. And all because it's not of interest to this, whatever strategic you built it with, doesn't mean it doesn't have a place somewhere in the universe for someone to buy it. And I think you're like you said, that's the prenup. You've got to be able to raise money from other people. You got to be able to, if the groom, no longer wants to show up at the altar, then you got to be able to go get, God forbid it turns into The Bachelor, but you got to have other options.
I'm not
Go ahead.
So I think you were saying it's hard being on a panel with him. I think the other one, right? So we brought out the idea of a prenup. I not having ever signed one, not having needing to have ever signed one. What I understand, right? You put that away, put that in the drawer, and what makes these things successful or not successful is working on the relationship from the very beginning all the way through to consummation or not consummation. And I think that's one of the key elements, right? I have had experience where there has been multiple changes at the business unit. And people don't own what others had previously decided. So I think it's an ongoing discussion, and I think that's probably where we may have fallen off there by not having maintained those levels of communication.
Just like any marriage, it's a massive trust exercise.
Yeah.
And you have to work from day one and every day to build trust. And that includes, really direct, open communication about what's going wrong as well as what's going right. And when you build that every day, then when the inevitable bumps in the road come, there's confidence that everyone is working really hard and with goodwill to get to a better answer.
Yep.
And that's essential.
Totally agree. Look, you've narrowed your cap table in a build to buy to a degree that you don't do in a normal startup company. And, what I tried to do when we just agreed to talk about this is like, what do you do if you're an entrepreneur dealing with a strategic to try to like hedge your risk, because it is an asymmetrical relationship with respect to who's got the power. And, part of it is having other investors that are equally interested in the returns that the startup company can get with kind of a sure pre-negotiated exit. So you're kind of taking the mystery away down to technical and clinical execution for the startup. And you know that there's a likelihood that there's going to be a trade at that price to a strategic for an exit that otherwise for a startup isn't guaranteed.
Mm.
So, and that lets you not have to build a company with multiple products and, technically qualify for investment bankers to stand you up for an IPO and stuff like that. So there's an inherent benefit of that. But the hedge ought to have an actual cap table. Don't be wholly reliant on the strategic. Raise money from other sources. And quite frankly, do the same thing that a strategic or a startup company would do and have relationships with the entire market, not just the strategic that you're working with, which comprises your hedge.
Yeah, that's where
Is that practical though?
No, not at all. That's why I was sorry. I was going to push back on
that was an underhand pitch. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Like, you can't, right? So look, I agree with you. Don't take too much money from the strategic, and given the accounting, I would prefer to take no money from the strategic.
Uh-huh.
Fund it through, professionals, so professional VCs. But because you have a limit of certain amount of capital, you are only going to be able to bring in one or two. You're not going to be able to syndicate as much as you would like to. You're also, when you're running to a milestone, we're not going to go and raise money, like we would normally do. You're approaching a milestone, you'll go out and raise the next round so that you can continue on through. In these build-to-buys, where this inequity gets out of whack, is you are running to slide into home base with no cash in the bank.
True.
And that's part of the prenup needs to be an exit fee if you choose not to acquire, to not as a penalty, but to provide that company with runway to be able to go out and syndicate with other investors.
All right. So that's another form of hedge.
Sorry?
Yeah. Kind of like a runway fee.
Yeah. There's got to be a runaway. Yeah, a runaway fee. I like that.
Yeah. Well, you're right that having additional investors is perhaps the strongest form of security for startups in general. Your insider syndicate is going to help you live or die and make you, survive until you can raise other money. It also makes the build-to-buy structure a little less efficient. Just to describe an example, with Fire One, which was set up as a build-to-buy, from the very start, we had two additional venture investors, Lightstone and NEA, in the deal, even though it was structured actually with Covidian, and they had a right to buy it. You helped set that up. And then 9 months into that, lo and behold, a really unforeseen thing happened, which was that Covidian got bought. And fortunately, Medtronic chose to continue the relationship. The company has gone on and taken on a very exciting but very challenging project, which has taken longer. And over time, we got to our milestone, and Medtronic, while still very interested in the project, wasn't ready to acquire at that point. And we were able to, since we had an existing syndicate, expand that syndicate and raise a big pivotal round.
It's a great example of one, right? I mean, it's 10 years, right? The Covidian deal was 2015 when it closed. You were working on that in 14 probably. And, it's been 10 year in the 11th year. Probably the timetable that we were talking about back then was 7. So, it's 4 years over. It's maybe a more attractive market now than it was then in terms of market size and what a product, if it worked, would do compared to so it's disruptive, fits all the things. I keep expecting Connor to like pop up behind me while I'm talking about Fire One, but I don't think he's here. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where who can't like that if it works? But the operating unit has forgotten about this at this point, right? I mean, it was at the top of, candidly, a non-existing operating agreement or operating unit in Covidian. When they did it, they weren't even in that market. They were trying to invest in disruptive technologies that required PMA instead of their ordinary portfolio of 510K development at the time. So it was really part of their like venture activity more than anything else. And it came over to Medtronic that had an operating unit that looked at it and said, that would be super cool, but it's way out there. So it automatically became a low priority.
Yeah.
It's a wait and see.
There's an inherent problem because, as being a general manager at Medtronic a couple of times, your horizon, and Chris will probably throw something at me, but as a general manager, your horizon's 2 to 4 years.
Yeah.
And these projects that we're talking about, we tried to do like a 2 to 4 year program. And it's like, we need more information. Right. So that's getting pushed out now if you get into that 7-year time frame, you're outside of the range again of that business unit. Yeah. Most likely, if they're any good, they're going to have rotated out.
It's not going to impact anybody's career during the development period. So you just have to accept that regime change is going to happen during a traditional medtech product development cycle on a build to buy. You have to. And, it's very hard to anticipate whether the new GM is going to like it, tolerate it or hate it.
I think we had that happen, 25 years ago. We had a new idea for carotid stenting. There was actually an ultra low profile stent that could be placed instead of a carotid filter during carotid stenting. And talked to an unnamed strategic who was really excited about this and wanted to do a build-to-buy structure. And we spent 6 months, I don't know how many trees were felled. That was back when everything was on paper to negotiate this incredibly detailed and elaborate agreement. And literally the night before we were all signing, the CEO of that company retired, and somebody else moved up to their slot, and somebody else moved up, and somebody moves, and the head of Corp Dev changed places.
I don't know why you're looking at me.
I'm not looking at you. It wasn't, yeah. The company did not start with an M. And the new person said, I'm not signing anything at all, anywhere for 6 months. And we were high and dry.
But that, I guess, that's the point you were making, Chris. That sort of shit happens always.
Yeah.
And whether it's a build to buy, whether it's just your traditional startup, that's the luck of what we all do. I think where I want to, the build to buy makes so much sense. And we need to come up with that name has got a bad rap. So we need to come up with something else. That's why I keep going back to alternative funding or something that's not sexy enough, but something. It's a program though, we're not providing, I'd like to see that we're providing acceleration, not necessarily an end product.
Yeah.
Now that's coming from, Ted.
We haven't talked about that, but look, there's a huge inherent value in developing a product outside of a large company, and that if you look for like why do build to buys exist, that's, as a former corp dev person, that's why it existed to me. Because, how long did it take you to get to where you were with 12 from, when you started to when Medtronic bought it?
3 years, 4 years.
That probably would have been, I don't know, but a year or two longer, at least, if it were apples to apples with the internal program. And, for an existential market that a cardiovascular company has to be in, that's a huge deal. That's a lot of time and money. And that's the whole point of it, that, you can develop it without an onerous quality system and, like 50 people on a committee chipping in about what the product design ought to be, and you can fail faster. You were on what product, Rev, at 12 when Medtronic bought it?
We're sorry.
We went through a lot.
How many? 50, right?
What was it? I lost.
We iterated on a weekly basis
no,
just for
That's
a year and a half.
50 at least.
Yeah, it's a lot.
No, I think we did a lot of work then at the time because there was a internal Medtronic program. And I think one of the key discussions when we were acquired was to understand how they'd gone about doing it. And their team was as smart, if not smarter than our team. They probably were more funded in most instances than our
Better looking. Yep.
better looking for sure. But I think it's decision making, and large companies are too encumbered.
Yeah.
And so you have to go out. If you have to go out to do this, you either pick up startups like 12 as just a traditionally funded startup, or you, as Lisa was saying, you collaborate. And that's what we're talking about with the build to buys.
Yeah.
It is an essential way. It's a weapon that the large companies have to get stuff done. But there's just we somehow have to break this inequity a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's in when the corporate strategy changes, or the corporate financial position of the strategic changes, and changes are made, it's maybe hard to recover from that. And I will say that in the build to buys I've worked with, the teams that I've worked with, that's the strategics, the corp dev and other folks who are working with us, they are feeling our pain, and they're doing everything they can to try to be as reasonable as possible in light of, still executing the company's financial plan.
Yeah. You still can't jam a deal on a CEO that doesn't want to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Or an operating unit leader that doesn't want to do it. And there's a lot of people that get to chip in and figure out that they want to kill a deal at a big company in a sea of changing circumstances. So it's and you can do some things, right? You can negotiate a put, but if we used Fire One as an example, the put wouldn't come into play yet because the product's not ready. It's just delayed. So, that's not a cure-all. It's just a fact of life that build to buy just is not a guaranteed off-ramp for the highway. And, that's kind of when we were talking about this panel ahead of time, which technically was last night, that's kind of the takeaway that we had, which is this is not a mandatory call option. It's an option, and you have to underline option, and you can structure around it, but everybody has to go into it with their eyes wide open on it. And, I don't know what the percent rate of success is for build to buys across medtech writ large. I'd love to know, but, I doubt it's 50%.
So actually on that note, Larry Best at Boston Scientific did a ton of investments, back 25 years ago in a variety of companies, and typically wrote in a call option at pickup price, just to have a call option, just in case things really got exciting. And that was the case. In hindsight, they acquired about a third of those companies, which was pretty good. They bought a third of those companies. That's great. But there was a little bit of a syndrome that evolved where almost all those companies thought, when we hit that milestone, they are going to buy us. And in their minds, they were working towards that milestone rather than working on the long-term success of the business.
Yeah.
And that was a bit of a mental
It's a
trap.
fundamental mistake.
Yeah.
Yep.
Number one.
I want to go back to you said 50%. If it was, I'd be thrilled if it was 50%.
But I have no idea.
No, I think it is. It made me
Spitballing.
think, because we got to go, and I would like to find that answer out.
Yeah.
And it can be done. It's the other way around, right? So startups we're used to, from a seed funded startup to get to returning 1 times invested capital. 5%. 95% don't do that. 5% make it. For seed funding to, so this is pre-venture funding, right? So there's a lot fall out together. To get to 3 times invested capital is 2 to 3%. So if these things are batting, I don't know, 30%, as Hanson said, that's a good outcome.
Man, you wonder how venture capital makes any money at all, really, right?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. All right. So we have 2 minutes left. I thought we would end this by getting the right to ask each other a question of our choice. All right?
Yeah, but you've been thinking about this. You've just put us.
Yeah.
No, I literally just thought of it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Why did you come up with this? And why did you pick us?
Well, the way I think about these panels is I think about who I want to sit up here with, and then I think of a cool title, and I don't think about it beyond that.
And that, by the way, was our prep.
Yeah.
I asked him a question yesterday when we were having a drink on something totally different, and he misconstrued it, thinking I was asking about the panel, and he got disgusted that I was actually trying to prepare. Nothing. It's like, I'm not asking about the panel. What's your question?
Oh boy. Yeah, I think that's the same thing. I was hoping you'd make it a point counterpoint, and
We got business to still continue doing. I thought this was going to be my last panel.
Ever?
Yeah, if I said that. What's yours?
What's the best deal you guys ever did?
Easy.
best deal. Yeah,
Best
I think.
deals.
Yeah.
Ardian.
Which one?
Ardian.
Ardian?
What's
All right.
what's going to happen over the next few years?
Yeah,
it's
I'm
good
looking
to
forward
see.
to seeing what this does for Medtronic
Well, yeah, for people, for patients.
people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This thing that sorry, you are hitting on a sore topic, and look, Medtronic has done. Sorry, they have done such a good job in continuing to invest and continuing.
Oh yeah, they played through.
Push. They really have done remarkable. But the ability, hypertension, 1 in 3 adults in the Western world. I think this is going to have a material impact. It's going to be something. Hopefully, we can point out to our kids.
Look, man, the financials on this thing are a little dug in, right? Because it took so long, and you had to run the trial twice and pursue adoption and reimbursement the way that it played out. But the potential impact on patients is probably the biggest thing out there that happened during the 10-year period that I was there. So I totally agree. I think Guardian is like the best health outcome for that's good for patients that came out of the pipeline over a 20-year period, probably. Lockwood.
We had a ton more from Foundry, but
It's worked out.
000, we made it.
We filled it up, and I don't think anyone's getting sued. So let's consider this a quiet success. All right. Thank you, everyone.